Good afternoon. My name's Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to our 6th annual Food and Beverage Consumable Study. In this webinar, we'll be covering key consumer, channel, and product trends across 15 consumer segments, including carbonated beverages, salty snacks, cereal, water, candy, ice cream, and more. I want to remind everyone that anyone that's participating in this webinar will receive a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the video. Our next webinar will be the 5th annual cosmetics study, and it's scheduled for November 14th. You can join us for this presentation where we'll be doing a deep dive into this super dynamic category. You can check back at our website at tabsanalytics.com in the next few weeks for that study sign up. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, Executive Chairman and Founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of this presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you can submit on your chat box in the GoToWebinar screen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and thanks to all of you who attended today for the 6th annual Food and Beverage Study. And you may notice, those of you who have been to other webinars, attended other webinars, that there's been a big change in this organization. We changed the background on our presentation, so that of course means it's a new era at Tabs Analytics. Just also draw your attention to our Twitter feed at Tabs Analytics and my own personal Twitter feed at Kurt Jetta. So those of you that use that as a platform, you can find hot takes of all the hot industry issues that you hear about in the news. So the methodology for this study is the same methodology we used for all of our industry studies. We use survey and then we corroborate that with other data sources we know to be true. This survey was done by TNS, a multinational research firm, to 1,000 adults 18 years of age and older. And we've done it at the same time every year since 2013. Once we get those responses, we weight them by age and gender so that they align with the national census. And we ask the same questions every time. First of all, what's the frequency that they purchase, the categories that many of them Dustin mentioned, and you'll see the full list as we get into the presentation. There's 15 of them. And these 15 really are a proxy for the entire industry. They account for 20% of all CPG retail and about 30% of food retail. So these are kind of the leading edge categories that give us a deeper understanding of the sector in general. We also asked their agreement on types of deal tactics used, and that was actually the original motivation for this study, is really to identify the importance of promotions, because nobody ever really talks about them. It's always kind of this dirty little secret, necessary evil, etc. And really wanted to kind of pull out what kind of deals are people using, how frequently, etc. Ask agreement on trend topics, and then finally, and this has become really the more important interest area, is to understand the outlets where consumers shop for consumables regularly. And this is the value of this, is it gives us a holistic view of the entire retail universe for food, because we look at specialty, we see online, we see the value food channels, etc. As I mentioned, we do take this data, we don't just take it verbatim, we make sure it corroborates with external and internal validity checks. So we make sure that if there's growth that we track in a certain category, that we'll go back to the Nielsen data or the IRI data, that we in fact do see some growth in that area. You'll hear me talk about this measure called share of mentions, which is a proxy for share of transactions by outlet. So understand that when I talk about share, that is the measure we're going against. And if you look back on some old webinars, I talk about that methodology and why it is a valid measure of share of transactions. So what we'll review is what are the food and beverage category trends, What are the demographic profiles? Who's our core shopper for these categories? What are the deal preferences of consumers? What are the outlet shopping patterns? And we're going to focus on e-com and then emerging channels, in particular value grocery and dollar stores. And I can't say dollar stores are emerging, but they're certainly continue to grow as far as store count. What are the attitudes towards some of these on-trend concepts like dieting and organics? And then we added some additional content, in particular on bagged candy, that we'll review. So let's get into the data. So the first thing we see is the reported average annual purchase frequency. So consumers tell us, we give them 5 buckets. Did they buy it at all, once or twice, all the way up to 11 times or more? So if I talk about very heavy buyers, those are the people that are just really hardcore about these categories. Interesting thing that pops out. So a couple things, just as far as a methodology issue. Last year we had this really big surge, and that's not unusual in survey data. So surveys tend to accentuate significant trends in the overall market, but they tend to overstate them, either plus or minus. So what we've done this year is we've normalized the data to look at a 2-year compounded annual growth rate. And so if we normalize the data, what we see, and this is really the first time we've seen this, is kind of a consistent level of growth and meaningful growth in a lot of different categories, which you can see toward the bottom. The only one that's declined is carbonated beverage. They're down 3% annually over the last 2 years since 2016. We see some modest growth on some of the larger, higher penetration categories, but really you can see some really big time growth in categories such as popcorn, which I would parenthetically say is in fact the greatest food on the planet. I'm putting a stake in the ground on that. Novelties and frozen pizza. And what we see on this, this overall growth is very consistent with the macro trends that have been reported, particularly in the quarterly earnings. We've seen Walmart, Target, and then yesterday Costco have all reported very strong gains in same-store sales. And I keep talking about these categories being a bellwether for that, and that certainly is the case here. So we see some pretty strong growth here. We see strong growth with the big-time retailers. So as I said, frozen pizza, novelties, and popcorn, which we've abbreviated to TGFOTP, the greatest food on the planet, seeing very strong gains. I mean, that's really, you haven't seen kind of 5-7% growth in transactions. I mean, probably in over 10 years in any given category, and here's 3 of them. So really nice growth we're seeing there. And what's driving them, and now you don't see it on the page, but as I looked into, why did we see the growth, there are more buyers and a growth in the really top level, those very heavy buyers. So they're getting more people buying, and they're getting people to buy more often, which is always kind of a good, strong indicator of not only just why things are growing, but they suggest that continued growth will be seen over the next few years. There's a lot in the industry on will water overtake carbonated beverage as the most popular beverage. Certainly in purchase frequency, it's still slightly behind. So water's at 8.3, carb bev is at 8.4. And that's kind of, they've been neck and neck the last 2 years. Salty snacks actually the #1 category, 8.7, and that is one that we, in fact, and again, look at, say, Pepsi growth. They continually report salty snacks as one of their big growth drivers for their, and not so much carb bev. That's why they're getting into other sectors. So again, the data aligning with things that we also can corroborate in the market. So let's take a look at who the heaviest buyers are. So we have a point system that we use to identify a heavy buyer. Basically, it's kind of a function of the number of categories they claim to purchase and the frequency that they purchase them. So they're defined as a heavy buyer. And that definition has stayed the same over the last 3 or 6 years. And so a couple things come out after the last study is, first of all, the usage does skew younger. So the heavy buyers tend to be younger, and with these vaunted millennials that the press seems to be so obsessed about, they're above average, but nothing to go crazy about. I think this will be the last year, actually, I'm going to talk about the millennials, because a lot of them are really aging out since I've been doing the study. I mean, this has been a topic of conversation for 6 years. Well, anybody that was 28 or 29 then is in that second tier and has moved on to a different life stage now. So it's really now Gen Z. Let's get crazy about Gen Z. For this study, as has always been every study, it's households with kids. It's not millennials. It's not any other group. It's households with kids. Even more so than income, where besides lower income, you don't really see a big difference in purchasing. And so you can see the average is 42% over the several years are heavy buyers. So if I have kids in my household, I'm twice as likely to be a heavy buyer of food and beverage as households with no kids. Now, that doesn't mean the majority of volume comes from households with kids, because remember, I mean, there's still only about 25 to 30% of all households. So the majority is still coming with households without kids, but the most efficient targeted messaging would go to households with kids. One thing I forgot to point out on a little bullet, but this is interesting. This is actually something we've got, even though there's growth in this ultra income, we do see we've seen the last few years where heavy purchasing peaks at 150,000 and then starts to trail off a little bit. And the implications now for our category is and that's one of the reasons why we don't see the sluggishness in our industry as much as we did, is because income growth used to be really isolated to the very high incomes. That's not the case anymore. In fact, the Census Bureau or Labor Relations Board, or one of those, Labor Statistics, BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, just reported that the median household income grew about 2%. And so for our industry, we really want to make sure that people in those middle incomes, they're seeing income growth, because that then trickles down to food and beverage. I found this interesting also. The West, there is definitely a meaningful dip in heavy purchasing. And it's not just people on the coast, kind of that stereotypical, California upscale household, but even in the mountain states, you can see down here 23% heavy usage. So there is somewhat of a regional skew as well. Which deal tactics are used most often? So we're looking at the 10 we've been asking about for the last 10 years, EDLP, shopper cards, private label, online coupon, etc. And then notice in the blue, I've highlighted what I call passive deal tactics, meaning I don't have to actually do anything to get the deal. I can just go to the store and show up. Now, in the past, there's been some pretty significant differences in behavior between users of active and passive deal tactics. Let's see if that holds true this year. So what can we tell about what are the most preferred tactics? Well, first of all, EDLP still is the most favored tactic, and you can see this overall average between the two groups we're comparing against, very young consumers, 18 to 34, 59%. Big drop in deal search behavior. That one I found probably one of the most interesting. So it has always been among the most preferred way. People just go bounce from store to store to get a deal, but you can see there's actually under this overall decline in the amount of places people will shop just to get a deal. And we're going to see that type of dynamic trickle through in some of the other data we look at. And so that has implications also on ways retailers would generate market share gains. Circulars popped this year, so they had just seen some sharp declines over the last few years, and there's a 5-point increase. Not sure why that is, but certainly was an interesting trend. And they're now the dynamics, not a trend yet, but they're now the number 2 tactic. very big gap, and I've noted this on a couple other webinars. So look at the difference in usage on circulars and FSI. So that does not bode well for the future of those two vehicles. So what's taking its place? And that's a good question, because online coupons aren't all that popular, even though retailers try and just pump them out because there's pretty low cost of distribution. They still haven't really gained a whole lot of traction. Shopper cards, which don't work as well as circulars and have been kind of solid but not great in terms of deal preference. Specific deals are not, there's nothing really growing here. They're all kind of either declining or stabilizing over time, at least growing on a consistent basis, I should say. Value sizes also saw a pretty sharp decline. So you see here from 41 down to 33, 34%. So, which has implications on club and ecom. Ecom, if anybody has been dealing with Walmart, and that's been public, they're trying to push their manufacturers and their vendors to offer larger packs, but if that is becoming less preferred as a way to get deals, that's kind of a headwind that they have to deal with. So now we're going to look at the same data, but now we're benchmarking it against kids with household with kids, and this is really, as we haven't mentioned, the most important segment. And here you see this sharp drop. Why do we see the sharp drop in deal search behavior? Is because these kid households really took a dive, 10 points. So that's statistically significant by far. And it really talks to when we're kind of emerging this story on, and I don't know why now, but I mean, it certainly suggests, the need for more convenience. So it's certainly, and a lot of the things that I hope to get out of this, or for people listening, is that you see value in this and really kind of you take the next steps to explore some of these findings, because there's money to be made if you can figure out why certain things are happening. Households with kids, as you would expect, with more people in the household, higher quantities are more important, but again, value sizes are declining in importance, as are bonus packs for these groups. So again, what's going to take their place? And you see circulars bounced up for this group as well. So we gather up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there wasn't kind of the aha type stuff, but we grabbed light deal, so you can see what determines a light deal user, medium, and heavy based on the number of tactics that they say they use regularly, not once or twice, but regularly. So the overall deal levels have remained fairly unchanged, but in the aggregate, you saw this big sharp decline among heavy deal usage, and then it's stabilized at 24, whereas light usage is pretty much stabilized. So not a whole lot of shifts there. We see in the heavy passive deal tactics, so that's been a fairly consistent decline. That's EDLP, private label, value size, and bonus packs. So, which would suggest, relatively speaking, more active tactics become more preferred. So people say no, they don't mind doing circulars or online coupons, etc. So do these deals, if I'm a heavy deal user, does that translate into higher purchase activity? And the answer is an emphatic yes. Going all Marv Albert on you, yes. And so you can see it clearly, whether it's overall deal tactics, active, passive. If I am a heavy deal user, I have a 40% likelihood of being a heavy buyer of the sector. That declines to 28% likelihood if I'm a medium deal user, and 17% if I'm light. Now, those, wise guys out there, well, that's just correlation. That's not causation. Well, I built a pretty solid case in past webinars. I've actually done a lot of actual academic work on the issue to, in fact, prove that it is, in fact, cause and not correlation. And so there is money to be made if I can then identify what is the profitable path to promoting and to appealing to these people. I mean, one thing you just don't ever hear about Shopper Insights is they like deals. It's one of the most fundamentally important aspects of their shopping trip. But you hear about, overall price, convenience, location, variety. I mean, all important. Engagement. They want to love their brands. No, they want deals. And that, regardless of what sector we're looking at, it's always very, very important. So where are these people buying? They're not bouncing around it quite as much to get those deals, but let's see how the shift in outlets went. So first of all, the two most popular remain the most popular: traditional grocery like a Ralph's or a Kroger or a Publix, Safeway, Stop and Shop, etc. But you can see there was a 2-point dip in both, so that's a meaningful dip. It's not dramatic, it's not alarming, but there's important meaning to that, because again, we've found over time that these studies do corroborate macro trends. And what are those macro trends? You see small format across the board growing. Dollar store because of more stores, of course, but that's a pretty big gain. 4-point gain from 21 now up to 33 over the last 3 years. CVS up, Walgreens flat, value grocery like Aldi up 2 points, and then even Rite Aid up 2 points. So this all kind of points to a convenience dynamic, I would think, huh? Because online also grew by 4 points. But look at, 17%, only 17% of the people in the country purchase online regularly. So it still has a long way to go. I had a little anecdote. Actually, I'll hold this for when I get to a little further on just talking about online purchase behavior. But you can see that that's, even though it's growing, that's still a pretty low number. So more people shop at, slightly more shop at Sam's, more shop at Aldi and Costco than online grocery, which needs a total national footprint. As we divide it into delivering grocery, we can see growth in both platforms, both preferred, but they're both now, we're highly fragmenting this, fairly underdeveloped vehicle, this channel. And the reason why they add up more to this is because people buying in dual outlets. But you can see that there is still decent pickup, but delivery is more preferred than pickup by 2 to 1. So there's all the articles about, pickup's becoming so, it's dominating, it's accelerating, it's explosive. Not happening. It's decent growth, meaningful growth, but they have a long way to go before they're anything materially important. What percent of the people buy in brick and mortar? Just go to the store and buy regularly? That's 99%, 99.4. So almost everybody in this country, once I hit 18 years of age or older, I'm going to the grocery store to buy my groceries. So as we share up all those mentions and we do a share of mention, we can see 57% of the transactions are in large format, 38 in small format. The decline, you can see Sam's over the last few years. Traditional grocery, it's not the retail apocalypse, but yeah, there has been some meaningful declines, but more for the smaller format than the online. Any online share jumped from 3.8 to 4.6. Now here's where, even though I claim that this is a highly reliable proxy for transactions, I tend to think that this is a bit overstated, only because the average number of transactions for just any brick and mortar retail is about 25. And so this is, to be a share of mention here, I only have to purchase 6 times. So I am pretty sure that online doesn't get a whole lot of people that are buying, say, more than 12 times a year. So that would depress this number. Whatever that number is, it's in general overall, this is lower than any other sector we've tracked. A, it is growing, but it's not explosive. B, and there's a lot more room to go before we would, before this is kind of this viable, big time, ongoing channel. And you can see Aldi, that growth was actually pretty significant as well. Lidl's a rounding error. It just achieved, broke through asterisk status. It's now, I think it was 0.2% share. So all the breathless writing and investigation on Lidl, still just such a non-entity. Didn't even deserve to be broken out. So this is that point I made, just understand the methodology on how we're getting this may overstate even some of the smaller outlets in general, but there's no question that there is a shift toward those channels, and we can in fact corroborate that through other data sources. So let's focus on e-commerce specifically. As I look at what percent of the people buy at all, well, that number is still the minority people buy even once online. What percent buy regularly? We've already seen this number, 17%. So only 1 in 6 and 99% are buying in brick and mortar by contrast regularly 6 times. And that's a very low benchmark, 6 more times. So if I take the ratio of those two, I get what we call a stated loyalty. What percent of the people that say they buy it at all buy there regularly? And that number is 44%. And even though it improved, and it's improved over time, it has such a long way to go before it hits any type of success norm. This is the minimum thresholds of success. This is worst in class that we've ever measured, not best in class. So, and why is this we considered a success norm? Because there will become a point where we won't be able to get the rate of acquisition of new customers is going to slow down. But what's happening now is we're losing more people than we're gaining, or there's a higher percentage of people that don't buy or that don't repeat than that do. And that's eventually, if I don't keep this number growing, this number, this 44%, is going to drag me down. We can see that right now in meal kits. I mean, that's the classic buyer attrition issue. It's buyer replenishment. They're not getting in people fast enough to account for and close the gap on the people that they're losing from just natural attrition. So, you know, anybody that talks about, you know, success or explosiveness, and the data is still, and this is just the demand side. There's still a big demand issue that nobody in e-commerce really talks about. All they want to do is really talk about drones and, you know, have your employees, you know, deliver their groceries to their customers. So, or how abused the Amazon delivery people are. So, you know, just still such a, you know, that's the supply chain side, and they haven't even addressed the demand problem yet. So how have the habits changed? Well, they're not changing all that, but the overall mix isn't changing dramatically, although there's a increasing rate and percentage of people that are exclusive to pickup now. Click and collect, it grew 47%, which is, okay, all right, I'll say, no, I'm not going to say explosive. I'm going to say rapid, because explosive means I have this acceleration that means this thing's going to be a phenomenon. And this is still just so low. Once it hits to 10, I'll change my descriptions, but that still has a long way to go. 20% very meaningful, 18% are dual platform, dual channel users, so they do both. And so that's the 47% right in the middle, but it's still just a very low percentage of people are still clicking and collecting. The pickup overall is 6.4%, long way to go to achieve scale, and then we have only 12% of the shoppers that are doing both. So you have this, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on the whole profit model, but you have a business that is national in scale. You have to build warehouses and, you know, networks, distribution networks everywhere, and now you've fragmented the way that you're reaching those consumers, and they're already questionable profitability anyway. I just, you know, my own experience, I just had, you know, one of the major e-commerce sites delivered me, because they couldn't deliver it on the first delivery, a case of Gatorade. I mean, that shipping costs had to exceed the price of what I paid for the thing. So where are they going online? What are the platforms, the domains that are most popular? Well, grocery banners made a comeback. This is a pretty dramatic decline over the 2 years, 16, 11, and 7, so it made a comeback. Probably due to the growth in Kroger really expanding, and then they had that relationship with Ocado. But again, that's a supply chain efficiency play. That's not really a demand play. Amazon actually, I said dip, and I mean actually it's immaterial. They were basically flat. Walmart increased slightly, you can see that. And then there's no evidence really that Amazon has capitalized on the Whole Foods gain. Now on the earlier chart I showed Whole Foods did pick up buyers, and so maybe they've gained from Amazon combination, but Amazon online business doesn't seem to have benefited as far as increasing their customer base for groceries. And remember, Whole Foods is primarily 2/3 is perimeter, and we're talking center store type of stuff here. So, and that's again the proxy for total store success that we're using. So here's where I'm going to unleash my anecdote here. So first of all, we asked about on-trend concepts. So we're only for drinks and snacks, but do they try and purchase organic? Do they purchase diet or low calorie? And do they research their products online before shopping? So first thing is organics continues to be, has always been, but it's very niche and very overrated. It's not, again, exploding. It's not for the masses. It's not mainstream. It has a niche appeal, a very appealing appeal. So certainly the demographics are appealing, tends to be upscale, but it is not a source of major customer acquisition. And again, it's one thing for fruits and vegetables, but for organics to really be a thing, it has to go beyond that. And it's not even clear it's big for that either. I mean, I've looked at organic milk productivity, for example, and far below mainstream milk. So diet products show it a big drop, so not quite as important for consumers. And then this is kind of probably the biggest limiting factor for online grocery because, again, people shop a lot, once every other week on average. And so if only 1 in 8 people are heavy online shoppers, that's going to be an inherent limitation to ever this thing being big. And so there's the anecdote. I was talking to a guy for a power company, so something totally different. But he said 23% of their customers still actually deliver their electric bill payment in person. Another 45% mail it. Now you could easily get online and either do auto pay or get online and do online banking. And so it's just really important to understand that we do tend to live, those people in the, in the jobs of all of you watching this are in a cultural bubble. We're not like the mainstream typically, and the mainstream is still going to the electric company and paying their bill, or writing out a check, putting a stamp, marching to the mailbox and mailing their electric bill. So, that's the type of people, and that's kind of why, this online, I mean, it's one thing for people to get online occasionally to buy, a car seat or, whatever, a blender or something like that, kind of these one-off high ticket purchases, but it's another to just have it baked in as a regular habit. It's just not a lot of potential there, it doesn't seem. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about bag candy. We're focusing on just one sector. So, and I think people in the industry that do bag candy probably know this. I found a couple things interesting. First of all, well, the Halloween chocolates, obviously, Halloween is actually bigger than everyday purchasing. Holiday purchasing is definitely skewed toward chocolate. You see a big gap between chocolate and non-chocolate, but when we get to everyday purchasing, non-chocolate actually is right neck and neck with chocolate as being a preferred online purchasing. So what is the implications for that? Well, if I'm doing shelf management, all this stuff to the left is typically in and out displays. It's not taking my day in, day out. So I would maybe look, whereas if people are doing just a simple space to sales, they would take the totality of the category. Actually, you really need to look at those everyday sales, and then everyday sales backing out promotional activity, and you'd probably get a different mix on the shelf if you did that. Where do bag candy buyers purchase their candy? And so here we see big time differences between their purchases of consumables overall and then bag candy. So if we look at, really strong skew of Walmart, Dollar Store, and Target. Food and bev, you can see, much lower than what we see in candy. In fact, 2/3 of the purchases are done on these top 4 channels. So that's a very high concentration of transactions. And conversely, club and small format, X-Drug, so X-Drug is probably right in the middle, and they promote it. They're very good at the way they market and promote candy. So, and that kind of helps them maintain their share. But these other guys, big time gap. And you look at the gap in online. I mean, they're not even 1% of the share of mentions versus 4.6% overall. So bad candy just not happening online. So they have quite a ways to go to kind of get to any type of reasonable share. So it's not clear why they're missing out on that. I mean, it may be because the holiday purchasing is such a big factor there, but even the everyday purchasing, you'd figure they should be higher than that. So what can we conclude from all this information? So consistent with the macro trends, we see resurgent growth in CPG retail, and consumables consumption also has increased meaningfully over the past 2 years. So kind of corroborates the overarching thesis of this whole exercise that I said. These categories are bellwethers for what's going on more broadly in our sector, and we certainly see that in our data and with the quarterly earnings reports from the retailers. Households with kids continue to be the most important segment in a very high reach sector, so they're twice as likely to be heavy buyers as households without kids. Deals are very important to a wide swath of consumers. 38% use 3 to 5 tactics. And again, that is regularly, not just once or twice, but they say they agree that they use them regularly as in a whole portfolio of deal tactics. And almost a quarter use 6 or more. So highly engaged at finding the best deal. And we find a very high correlation with heavy purchasing and heavy deal usage, and that correlation is actually causation. I should have actually added that. EDLP has the #1 position as the most preferred deal tactics. Circulars #2 with 45% of the shoppers. Deal search behavior dropped quite a bit, all from kids' households. And then there's a huge gap in FSI and circulars among younger shoppers to the general pop. And these are the heaviest shoppers in the sector, and it just means that manufacturers probably should start looking for a different way to get those offers out to the consumer, or more, try different ways to make their online offers or their shopper card offers more compelling, because buy one, get 50% off isn't getting it done. That we can say definitively from all the work we've done. So brick and mortar grocery still dominates with 95% of transactions, 99% of adults buying there regularly. Online, though, does continue to gain, but still has quite a bit of ways to go. 13 to 17% buy there regularly, and their share is now approaching 5%. But despite these gains, it has a long, long way to go to be considered successful. So Walmart and Target and Amazon talk about gains in their e-commerce. And from our study, I mean, certainly it's growing here, but we see some really, really big gains in sectors like vitamins and cosmetics and personal care. Really, the non-food is driving a lot of those gains. And food is growing, but not nearly to that extent. And so, as I mentioned, these still have 62% of the shoppers don't buy any food or beverage online, and the royalty rate is still well below where it needs to be a successful business. And because you still hear Walmart talking about, as Target, they're not making any money with e-commerce, they're just growing their sales. So they're well positioned once they figure it out, or I would say if they figure it out, which I question, but if it gets figured out, they're pretty well positioned. They've done a nice job building their consumer base. The large trend in grocery, though, isn't a shift toward e-commerce, it's a shift toward convenience. So we see that based on a growth in online as well as small format. And we also see that as far as consumers not being as amenable to shop for deals and bounce around from store to store to get the best deals. And then here's a question: why are General Mills, Campbell Soup, and Heinz struggling? And I would suggest all three of them. I mean, Heinz by definition is a natural and organic company, but they've all placed this big time emphasis on organics and felt like that was their growth, fuel the growth. And when actuality, it's unproductive. It's a niche in mass market. And even in some of the work I've done in natural food, it doesn't seem to be all that productive. Again, the bulk of organic business and whole foods business is in the perimeter with vegetables, meats, fruits, etc. And so it's just, I mean, at some point people will come to the realization that it's not a segment that has broad mass appeal and mass market. It's a source of incrementality, but certainly there's just kind of way too much emphasis on it as far as space and items and that type of thing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to my associate, Tucker Malsh, who is going to show you something that we have to offer in the candy sector. So Dustin, can you make him the presenter?
Will do. Yep, Tucker, you're now presenter.
Great, thanks Dustin. Thanks Kurt. All right, so yeah, I wanted to share a couple different things with that we're doing with Nielsen in terms of a demo site and an offering that we're doing in order to host the data and give you guys an environment to get a lot more resources and a lot more insights from it. So
I'm gonna go ahead and share your screen. Click the share screen button. Nothing's showing yet.
Okay, let me see.
There you go.
How's that, Dustin?
Great. That's very good.
Cool.
Thanks.
So yeah, to start off, I just wanted to tell everybody on the phone, we have been doing a recent marketing campaign with Nielsen. We have a new video that we've just come out with, working with Robert Baldwin, our VP of Marketing here at Tabs, and some of the marketing leadership over at Nielsen. So it's basically a 2-minute video that goes through our value proposition, kind of what this whole Connected and Insights platform is. So as part of our email after this webinar, we'll include a link to the video so you guys have that as an asset. In terms of where you actually go to get the demo itself, once again, we'll have that link, but from Tabs Analytics, you would go to Pivot Stream, Solutions, and then Candy. And on here, in addition to the video that I just mentioned, you can kind of see, once again, some other highlights of the value proposition and, some other testimonials and things like that. So I wanted to show you what you guys will be seeing once you go to that landing page. Once you fill it out, you'll get an email with your credentials sent to it and a link to the site. So today, yeah, I just wanted to show you the site itself and a couple different examples which pertain to what Kurt was speaking to earlier on the candy segment. In general, it's all about saving time. So every month, when you get your new Nielsen data, it normally takes a lot of time for your team to refresh that information, to understand how things change, period versus period, and then to push that out to, the rest of your team. So what this is doing is taking a lot of time out of the system, making things a lot more efficient, giving your time back in your day and your weeks to really focus on the business, actually take action on the insights, and then, share best practices with the team. So a lot of times, you'll have a few different leaders that will be able to push reports out, but you want it in an environment where anyone on your sales team, anyone on your marketing team, really anyone in your organization can then use this platform, online. We've made it very simple. You have access to it, 24/7. So gone are the old days where you have a gatekeeper and trying to, have to go through 1 or 2 people. That was kind of another premise of putting this together. So we host the data models on our servers. You can kind of see the, interaction here. Very much like a Dropbox format. This is actually our live demo site with real Nielsen data. The data's refreshed as of June's refresh, so very, very current information. you can see, you know, kind of the main folders. We've got sales reports, and I'll walk through an example of each, but sales reports, performance decomposition, that one's one of my favorite. You've got your, you know, your weighted distribution, your productivity, relative productivity, where do you stack up versus your competition? How much sales contribution will you be bringing versus the others? Very helpful in terms of category management, shelves management, fighting for space, and really having those talks when you go into your retailer buyers. Rank report is our SKU level reporting. And then finally, you know, there is weekly data as well with Nielsen. So you've got your periodic data looking at, you know, your 4-week, 52-week type of visibility. And then you've also got the weekly data as well. So I'll just jump into a couple different examples. This is our sales performance report. In terms of how you interact with the reports themselves, everything is used on these slicers on the top. So, you know, always start in the top left, choose your time period, choose your market. So for this one, I'm just going to do 26-week total US convenience. And then most of the things on here are just going to be slicers that are based on Nielsen attributes themselves. Do note though that we do have, it's a very flexible platform, very custom, you know, very easy to customize. So, you know, a lot of our customers do come in and ask to have either, you know, different slicers added, or maybe different ways of looking at the products, different ways of looking at the flavors, packages, things like that. So I'll show you a few examples on here, but, you know, for the most part, what you're going to see today are just straight up Nielsen attributes and pulling in what we felt was, you know, most relevant to these reports. So in terms of the report themselves, this is really just volumetrics. You've got your dollars, your change, and your share, your units, your change, and your share, and then your cases as well. So very, you know, very straightforward report, but it does have this kind of nested ability here. So you look at, you know, Haribo, like the gummies, Twin Snakes, Gold Bear, some of the most popular candies out there now. You can see they're up, you know, 34%. Very easy to drill down and kind of see what's happening in terms of their performance. So, you know, that's really it on the sales performance report. I'll jump to a performance decomp. So this is the one that I mentioned that kind of has everything on one page. So it's got your weighted distribution, it's got your velocity, and it's got your productivity. So I'll focus on those. You know, per Kurt's comments earlier, he was talking about bagged candy. So I chose total US, and I went over to the right, chose a slicer, chose bag here. So just kind of got that aligned. And also note, when you see the video that comes out on the email, this example will be very similar to that. So I kind of wanted to show a similar example. So looking at chocolate bark down here, you can see they're up 37%. Equivalized SKU is our term for weighted distribution. So we take, you know, the ACVs at the SKU level, and then we build up, you know, based on, you know, to the brand level, brand family, supplier, or in this case, common consumer name. So what it's really doing is it's giving you a relative weighted distribution. So 2.6 for chocolate bark. Let's say compare that to breast sweeteners at 8.8. So breast sweeteners have, you know, over 3 times, you know, the distribution. But let's look then at their, you know, their overall sales is down compared to chocolate bark, which is up. Then let's look at productivity. So they're sitting at, you know, 74%. Chocolate bark is sitting at 127. So if you compare those two numbers, you know, you're going to get 70% more sales contribution with chocolate bark, despite the fact that they have 3 times the distribution. So you can kind of, you know, use the slicers, get it down to your right price point, your right category, your right segment, your right market. Obviously, with a live tool, you could even choose retailer data. And then have those conversations when you're with the retailer, or when you're actually trying to fight for shelf space and try to, you know, make this assortment more optimal. So very easy way to kind of get a really good landscape of what's happening with your brands, your competition. Out to the right is something we call organic growth, which is really your consumer pull or your change in velocity year over year. So chocolate bark right here is up almost 10%. you've got breast sweeteners here down 7%. So just another thing to be, to have in your kind of arsenal when you're talking to people, to say, okay, well, not only is it, is the productivity 70% better for chocolate bark, but the swinging consumer pull is obviously a very large one, almost 20%. So you're going to move faster. You're going to also bring more revenue per point of distribution. So I would note also there's an explanations tab on here. I would certainly look at that when you're in the demo site. It answers a lot of the questions on what these measures are and what we've created. And then going on to the next couple examples. Sorry about that. Frozen for a second.
Don't do webcasts and demo this. It's our new learning.
Yes.
Hey, actually, Tucker, in the interest of time, I have to take the mic back from you anyway. So
yeah.
Yeah, well, should we go to questions? Tucker, can you just clarify again that this data is live, it's actual data, it's not mass data, and it's available for free, correct? And how long is it available?
Absolutely, Dustin. Yeah, so yes, it's live data. It's real data based on the June refresh, and it's available for a 30-day trial.
Awesome.
with us in Nathan.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to questions then. I just have a couple of questions here. If anyone has any questions, you can submit them over in the bottom right box. We have just a few minutes left here. One of them is back early on in the presentation around private label. It says, see private labels plateaued as a deal vehicle. What do you think the future is for private label in U.S. retail?
Private label's maxed out, and it has been for some time. It's not like people try and use the what goes on in Europe as hey, it could get to this